Welcome to Computing at Home with Digital Schoolhouse. My name is Estelle, otherwise known as ComSciGeek. I am a computing teacher and I also develop resources for the programme. We specialise in delivering computing workshops that are accessible, educational and fun. You're watching part 2 of our Switched On Sound workshop. This part of the workshop will be using the Nintendo Labo piano, but don't worry if you don't have one of those, you can watch as we work through the activities. Don't forget you can watch any of our previously streamed workshops on our YouTube channel. Just search YouTube for Digital Schoolhouse. To all learners watching, remember you can pause the video at any time to take notes, collect your thoughts, or take part in the workshop alongside me. The Digital Schoolhouse team is ready and waiting in the chat should you have any problems or questions, and I'll be taking 5 minutes at the end to answer your questions. Parents and guardians, you might want to watch the next bit as it explains how to access our resources, but after that feel free to join in or sit nearby to supervise if you want to. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the resources that you're going to need for today's session. So just bear with me while I jump over and pull those up for you. Okay, so you're going to need a copy of these worksheets. So these are the worksheets that I went through last time, and I'll show you where to access them on the website again. So there is this one, which is the punch cards for the Nintendo Labo piano. You've got this one, which has got the different example instruments using different waveforms. You've got some blank ones, which you can then cut into your own ideas and experiment with different things. And those are the 3 worksheets that you're going to need for today. So those are the ones that you'll be needing. Okay, so now you've seen those, I'm just going to go through where you'll find those resources on our website. Okay, let's see if we can get into transition. Okay. Okay, so you'll need to head over onto the Digital Schoolhouse website, which is digitalschoolhouse.org.uk. Once you've got onto the website, just wait for that to load. There we go. Once you've got onto the website, you'll need to go to, when it comes up, it's on a bit of a go slow today. You'll need to go to resources and then click on live workshops. Let's try that again. Hopefully it will do a little bit quicker this time. Resources and live workshops. And then you'll need to find the Switched On Sound section, which is at the top. If you're watching this on YouTube, you might need to scroll further down the page depending on when the live workshop was actually broadcast. So click on Switched On Sound. This will take you over to the page where you'll find all the resources for this workshop. If you're a teacher watching, all these resources are available for free if you fancy downloading them and having a go with your class. And you'll need the public files, which is the DSH worksheets, SOS, Switched On Sound, Live. And as I said, we're just going to be using those 3 worksheets, but this is the full pack for both parts of the workshop. So those are the resources that you'll be needing for today's session. So I'll just wait for this to load a little bit and then I can show you what it looks like. And then we'll move on to the next section. Apologies, my internet connection seems very slow today. But as usual, our workshop will be on our YouTube channel later on if you miss anything. So yeah, these are the Switched On Sound worksheets which were used in the last session, which include the 3 that I showed you on the visualizer at the beginning. Okay, so that's what we're going to be using today. Okay, so without further ado, let's have a look at today's workshop, and we'll be building on what we learned last time, all about how computers represent sound. So let's get that up for us and then we can make a start. Okay, I'm just waiting for everything to load. My computer is really going slow, so I do apologise if we end up losing anything at some point. And apologies for the late start today as well. We had some technical difficulties earlier on. So today, this is Switched On Sound Part 2. In this workshop, you're going to be learning about binary representation of denary, and we looked at that in Part 1, but we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail again today. We're going to look at how sound can be sampled and stored in digital form. We're going to be looking at how sampling intervals and other factors affect the size of a sound file and the quality of its playback. We'll be looking at sample size, bit rate and sampling frequency, and we'll look a little bit at why we need to compress sound to make it the right size for accessing on a computer. So these are, as you'll notice, the same challenges as we looked at in part 1, but we're going to be looking at them in specific detail using the Nintendo Labo piano this time. So it's a little bit different to what we did last time. So we're going to start off with looking at punch cards. So what we're going to need for this is the Nintendo Labo piano, and we're going to be using the punch cards that come with it, and we're going to be using them to control some of the sound that comes out of the piano. But before I dive straight into showing you the punch cards and talking through that, let's do a quick look at the piano itself so you can get an idea of what's possible with that. So I'm just going to bring that up now, and then we can have a look and hopefully you'll get an idea of what's possible. So here is my Nintendo Labo piano. I need to turn it on because it turns itself off and goes to sleep if I leave it for too long. And I'm going to press A at the back and wake it up. There we go. And I'm going to go into the toy piano to start with. I'm just going to make sure this is turned up. So I think I turned it down earlier. Yes, I did. And now I can just play a little bit. I can't play the piano, so I apologise in advance for my piano playing skills, but you'll get the idea. There you go. Okay, so there is our piano, and you can see I can press the keys and it interacts with the keys to make the different sounds. So just like a normal piano does, okay? So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to look at those punch cards. So before we jump into looking at those in detail on the visualizer, let's have a little look at how we're going to be using them to represent sound. So you'll remember from the previous workshop that we learned that punch cards were used to represent different binary numbers, and that's the same thing with the Nintendo Labo punch cards. They work in the same way. They're going to be used to represent different binary numbers that are in turn going to be used to represent different sounds. So let's have a little look at what I mean by that. So here is the punch card. You can see it's called the rhythm card, which might give you a bit of a clue as to what it's going to be used for. As it says, if you don't want to use the one that came with the piano, you can chop these ones up and actually use them from the worksheets if you prefer. Either is absolutely fine and it won't make any difference either way. And I'll talk you through how to do that in a minute if you need a bit more detail on that. And the way this works is each row represents a different part of a drum kit. So the top row on the punch card represents the crash cymbal. The second row represents the hi-hats, and the hi-hats are the cymbals that kind of crash together like that. And yeah, they're used obviously a lot in music, so you might well have come across those previously. And the third row represents the snare drum. It's the green row there, and then the bottom row, the yellow row, represents the kick drum, the bass drum, the one that you can hear, the very low bass drum sound. Okay, so that is what we're going to be using. So these are all the parts of the drum kit that you're able to use on the Nintendo Labo piano. Right, so let's have a look now at how we are going to use that on the actual kit itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump over onto the visualizer. There we go. And then we can have a look at the punch cards. So the punch cards work by allowing you to control the different parts of the drum kit, as I said. And now you can do this by chopping them out. So grab yourself a pair of scissors and cut out these punch cards. Like so. So this is where you can, if you don't want to use the actual one that came with the kit, you can experiment with one of these to start with if you prefer. There we go. And then what you do is you can then punch holes through where the holes are shown on the card itself. Okay, so I'm just going to move my excess sheet out of the way so I'm not struggling with that. And then I've got a little bit of Play-Doh here, and I've got a sharp pencil, and I'm going to use them to just make sure I can make the holes without managing to stab myself in the finger. So I'm going to put the bit of Play-Doh underneath, and I can then start to punch the holes in. So you remember the first row, the top row represents the crash cymbal. So that was the crash. You can write it on there if you want to. Then we had the hi-hats. And then we had the snare drum. And last we had the kick drum, which is the one that you control using your foot normally. So you punch the holes through everywhere that you want that particular sound to occur. So I'm going to have a crash followed by a snare drum, I think, like that. Then I'm going to have a hi-hat. And then I'm going to have a snare again. Okay, and once you've punched the holes in, you can then put it into the Labo piano for it to then play the sound. Now the way that this works is that, if you can see, the holes go right through, and the way that this works is it actually shines a light, and whether the light is reflected or not depends, will make the switch decide whether or not to play that sound. So that's actually how it works. So that's why making sure the holes go right through perfectly is really important. If you've got a single hole punch device thing that you can punch single holes with, you might find that really useful for punching the holes in. So if you have got one of them, use that. It'll make it a little bit easier. But if not, sharp pencil with something to hold behind so you don't stab yourself accidentally works just as well. Okay, so let's jump over and have a go at putting this on the piano. So we need to come out of this mode, because this mode that I've got at the moment is the one for playing the piano, but not for changing things and that. So we need to go into the studio for that. So we're going to close this. You'll hear some music playing, and we're going to go into the studio. Okay, so we're going to go into the studio and we'll have a go at using the punch card. So I'm just waiting for that to load, so it gives you some warnings. There we go. So what we do is we're going to put the punch card into the slot that's just at the top of the Labo piano, and then next to it, in fact, I'm going to swap and use this one I've got here. So I'm going to use this one. So I've just accidentally dropped it right through the slot. I've already punched some holes in this one, and I'm going to put that into the slot. There we go. And then if I press the button next to it, I'll show you where the buttons are in a second in the presentation. That will then scan the card, and it scans it to work out where the holes are, as I said earlier. So there you can see, from the scan, you can see clearly where the holes fit. There you go. So you can see that the places where there is no hole is what's being played. So what I'm going to do next is maybe take some of the things out of it, because it doesn't work particularly well. So I'm just going to stop it. There we go. So I'm going to make some changes to my punch card so it makes it sound a little bit better. So the way that this would work is it actually works in just the same way as our COBOL punch cards worked, but instead of each of the the holes in the card representing the different the different instructions, it instead represents a sound. So that's what we're using instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some of these, pull some of these out so we get some more holes in there. And I want to leave that one there. And then we can work out what we want to include and what we don't want to include. So I'm going to pull out that whole top row so it gets rid of the crash or the ride. Sometimes it's a ride cymbal, it depends on what the drum kit setup is. And I'm going to put back in the ones where I want to keep it. So we can see what happens when we put this in with lots of holes in it and sit and compare it to the original version. Okay, so let's see what that one does now. So we pop it in, we'll do a bit more experimenting, see what happens. Oh, I'll show you what I'm doing. Sorry. There you go. Hey, that's pretty cool. So you can see that in this way, the way the holes work is kind of the opposite way to how they normally work in a punch card. So instead of being the hole representing where you have a 1 and you'd actually have that sound being played, it's the opposite way round. So when the hole's filled, that sound's being played. Okay, so there you get it. That's how the punch cards work on the Nintendo Labo. So last time when we looked at how the punch cards worked and how they linked to binary, that's how they then work using the punch card in the Nintendo Labo. Excellent, I hope you enjoyed that. Let's have another look and see if we can now delve a bit deeper into some of the other things that we learned last time. Okay, so I'm just going to jump over onto our presentation, so bear with me a moment. I have things still not working quite as they should do at the moment on my computer, so it's not going to be quite as smooth as usual, so apologies for that. So I'm going to jump onto our PowerPoint and I'll show you what I have put together. Okay. So there we go. So we've learnt about punch cards, and I'll just show you the top of the Nintendo Labo piano so you can see what I was pushing to make it start. So what I was pressing was the very top button, which is just, you can just see in this picture here. So when I push the card in, I press that, and then it scans the card, and then it will then use that to control the drum kit and the sounds that are being played by the Nintendo Labo. There we go, and we had a little bit of an experiment with making different sounds, and we put different holes in and closed some of them up as well, and then we ended up with different things, different sounds being played. And what we could have done if we had a bit longer is we could have hard coded effectively the ones that we really liked using the version of the cards that I gave you in the worksheets, where you could actually then just top it up yourself and have a look at what was available. Okay. So the next thing we want to have a quick look at is how we can conduct it. So we can actually control the speed that the Nintendo Labo is playing our drum beat at by using the blue controller. And I'll just quickly show you what that looks like. So the blue controller is, apologies having to show you behind the scenes, I normally avoid doing this, but it's not very happy today. So you can use the blue controller, and we can use that as a conductor. So as part of the package that you get with the Nintendo Labo, you also get a bit that fits onto the blue controller, and it needs to be used with the strap. So I'm just going to get the strap from my kit as well. So I have it over here, so I'm just going to grab that as well, and I'm going to put those two pieces together to show you how this works with the Labo piano as well, so we'll be able to hear a little bit more of the sound coming through from the piano. So let's just get that set up for you. So the idea of using the strap with this is just so that you don't end up accidentally throwing the conducting stick across the room or something like that, because you don't want that to happen. So I'm going to turn my controller. Woo! You can hear it playing back very noisily for me. There you go. So we just need to make sure that it's not going to do that accidentally, because that is really annoying. So let's just rescan. Woo! Okay, we need to rescan the there we go. We need to rescan the punch card so we can then control the sound as well. So hopefully this should work, and we should be able to then control the speed that we're playing the sounds at. Okay, so okay, for some reason it's convinced that I'm pressing on the keys, and I think it's got the recording still in there. I think that's part of the problem. That's why it's playing that awful sound. So let's just make sure that that's all back where it should be. There we go. Okay, so you've got the idea that we can control the drum beat. So you can hear my amazing playing skills, which are definitely need some work. So you get the idea. Okay, you get the idea that you can control the piano by using the conductor. I'm just going to close that so it doesn't keep going off automatically. Okay, and we'll turn the sound down as well. Okay, so hopping back onto the camera and talking to you from this way. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to talk to you a bit more than I would normally, and rather than showing the presentation, because it's really not very happy at all today. So that was just giving you an idea of how you can use the other controller as like a conducting stick, and then you can control the tempo, which is the speed the piece of music should be played at. So that's what we were just doing there. And if you didn't already know, the conductor is the person who stands at the front of an orchestra and controls the tempo that everyone plays at. And they would hold a special kind of stick that they use to control the speed that everyone's playing at. So we use that actually in music with an orchestra as well. So it's not just something that Nintendo came up with, it's something that's used in real life in orchestras. When people are playing in a big group together, they need to have someone that controls the tempo and what speed everyone is going to play at. Okay, so the next thing we're going to have a look at is we are going to move on to how you can record different sounds. So the Labo piano comes with a few different settings, and I'll show you some of those now. So what we've got is, as part of the kit, we have some different dials that we can put in and change the sounds that we can hear. So let me show you those now. So these are the different dials that come with the Nintendo Labo piano. So for now, I'll just show you how 1, 2 and 3 work, and then I'll talk you through this extra one, which will illustrate a little bit about how digital sound works as well. So what I'm going to do is, if I can't quite show you easily on the presentation now because it's not working properly, but what I'll show you is on the Nintendo Labo piano, probably back on again, there you go, just above here there's a space for this to drop in. So if I pop that in and then go to the toy piano again, so if we swap between, so we've got this one to start with. Oh, I'll turn the sound back up so you can hear it. Okay, and then if we drop this one in, and we're changing the sound that's being created. So if you watch the first part of the workshop, you might have some idea of how that's actually how that's working. So let's try number 2 and see what this one sounds like. Okay, so we've got a different sound again. And let's try our third one and see what that one sounds like. So this is number 3. Oops. So the way that this works is it's read by using these little tabs. And again, it's using it by reflecting light off the tabs. So we just pop those in so that we can then hear this other sound. There you go. So we've got some different sounds going on. So let's have a bit of a closer look at how this is actually working. So you might remember from last time we talked about how sound is actually all about vibration. So this one does something slightly different. So if we pop that one in, again, I'm just going to make sure the pieces are all folded down because it's not quite folded down as it should do at the moment. So I'm just folding those down. I'm going to pop that in there. And this time, you might notice that they're all turned into like little quivering, scaredy bit things. Okay, but you can still just about hear the sound. But what's going on now is, instead of it working by making the sounds through the Nintendo Switch itself, what's happening is it's using, we'll just get this off so I can show you, it's using the rumble, or the actual vibration that's being made by the blue controller. So if I put the blue controller on top of the Nintendo piano, you'll actually hear it vibrating and making the different sounds. So just like we discussed last time, that sound's actually created by making vibrations. Can you hear it just about? So the different vibrations of the different notes are being created because the controller is actually vibrating at the right speed, at the right frequency to create that note, just like we learnt in the workshop last time. Okay, so that's then linking to the next part of the workshop. So the next thing we're going to look at is how we can actually create other sounds. So we learnt about this in the workshop last time, and we talked about using different waveforms. We talked about pitch, and that was how high or how low a note was. And we learnt that you can represent different pitches by changing the frequency of the actual sound wave. So you might remember that we swapped between the different ones, and we had a sound wave that was really quite big, with big gaps between each wave. And that was a low frequency, making a low sound. But where we had lots of waves in the same amount of space, then having them all packed together, that gave us a really high sound. So we used frequency, and we looked at the different sound waves to see how that controlled the sound being produced by the computer. and well, in fact, by anything. So that's exactly the same way as it works for any instrument. So if you played a trombone or you played a cello or a violin, the way the sound works is the same. It makes a vibration which causes a high note if the vibration means that the frequency means a lot of those sound waves packed into a small area, or it will be a low sound if there are less of them in the same amount of space. So we looked at that last time. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how we can take what we've learned so far, and we can use this now with making different Labo piano create different sounds. So that's what we're going to be looking at next. We're going to look at waveforms for this. So we did talk about this a little bit last time, but this is going to go into a bit more detail because we can actually show a lot more using the Labo piano for this one. So let's have a look at some of the waveforms that we can use to start with, and then we'll have an experiment with what they sound like on the piano. So let's jump on to the next of the worksheets. So this one's quite handy because you might want to have a go at this one later on and actually cut your own designs out. But for now, I would use the pre-built ones that I've actually provided for you. So these are a few different sounds that we can create by using these different waveforms. So you might remember from last time, we talked about how digital sound is created by measuring the waves. So the way this would have worked is the computer or somebody would have worked out all the measurements for the different sound waves and measured them at separate intervals, and then drew the sound wave to create something that sounded like, in this case, a celesta or a clarinet or an organ. And you can see the different sound waves are different shapes, and these will then create a different sound when we put them into the Nintendo Labo piano. So let's have a look at some of the ones that come with the piano. So we've got two examples here which we can have a little look at and then have a listen to as well. I'm just going to turn the sheets over so you can see them more clearly. So these two sound waves will create different sounds. So let's have a little look and a listen to what they sound like. Okay, so we're going to pop this one in. We're going to go back into, there we go back into the studio mode. And we're going to listen to this new sound. So if we scan it in, we should now get a new scan. This time, instead of scanning as a drum beat, it will scan as a waveform card. There you can see this is called a saw wave because it looks a bit like a saw. So, okay, it sounds different to our previous ones. Let's take it out, listen to it again. And then if we rescan it, okay, and reset it, we should get different sounds. Actually, I've just remembered something. I left this one in. We need to swap that out, don't we? Otherwise we're only going to get vibrations. So let's put the number 1 back in. So that's what it sounds like to start with. Let's pop the saw wave in and see what that sounds like now. So we're using a different sound wave for each of the notes. So now, once it's scanned, we should get a different sound. Okay, so we're getting a really different sound now being produced because the computer is using this sound wave to represent every single note. So in the same way as we learnt last time that a computer takes measurements regularly, at regular intervals to create a sound wave, the Nintendo Labo is using this sound wave, which is again not got measurements, and it's using those measurements to then create the sound for every single note. So the wave that is being produced is the same for every single key I press, but the difference is the frequency is changing. So whereas we might have 2 of these full waveforms in the note down the bottom here, we might have the equivalent of 4. We might have double the amount in the same area up here because we're making the frequency higher. So there's more of these sound waves in the same amount of space. So that is exactly what we talked about last time. Okay, let's have a listen to another one. So let's try this sound wave as well. So we've got a different one here, and we'll see what this waveform, what sound this creates. So let's swap them out and see what happens. Okay, so let's have a listen again. So down the bottom here, it sounds like this. Okay, so we've got a different sound from this sound wave, but it works in the same way. It's just that because the measurements of the sound wave are different, and because the shape of the sound wave is different, it means the vibrations that are being produced mean the sound comes out differently. And so that's why whenever we create a different waveform, we will change how the sound is being produced by the Nintendo Labo. Right, so let's have a look now at some of these ones that I gave you as part of the pack, and we'll have an experiment with some of those now and see what we end up with. Okay, so let's go back to the 3 different ones I've given you, and then we can have a little bit of an experiment with those. So I'm going to cut out the Celesta first, and we'll have a listen to that and see what that sounds like. I'm going to make the top bar slightly wider, because I don't think it was quite wide enough when I did it earlier, and that's why it slips through. So I'm just doing it. Obviously, every time I cut this out, if I cut it out differently, it's going to make the sound slightly different. And you can experiment with that. You might want to cut it out to start with and then make changes to how you've cut it out afterwards. Experiment to see what changes it will make by just making little changes to how you've cut it out. So the reason, as I said, the sound waves look different for these different instruments is because the way the vibration is created by that instrument is slightly different. And the vibration is what creates the sound that you can hear being output. So just finish cutting out the Celesta sound. There we go. I'm just going to cut across like that. And I'm going to give, as I said, I'm going to leave a bit of a bigger bar at the top so that it doesn't slip through this time. So let's swap these ones over. I need to cut it a little bit thinner because it's going to not quite fit in the hole at all now. So let's try that. And then we will see what this one sounds like. So let's pop it in the slot. There's like a little slot at the top. Oops. And I'll just pop it onto the front camera so you can see what I'm doing. Oops. What you do have to work with it a little bit is just to make sure that it isn't accidentally curling up. So it's just curled up slightly there. And that's stopping me from getting it through the slot. So the other thing that you might find useful is for this particular activity is you might find it better to use some slightly thicker paper or even maybe a little bit of card if you're struggling to get it to go through, which it normally goes through fine. So it's probably more to do with the fact I'm trying to do this at a different angle to what I would normally be doing it at. Right, there we go. Okay, so now if I scan this, I should get a different sound again. So just to remind you that the last sound wave that we were using earlier sounds like this. You can see the sound wave being produced over here. Let's scan it and see what this one sounds like. Okay, so we should get a different sound wave coming out of this one. There we go. So that's the Celesta. That sounds different. So let's try one of our other ones. We've got 2 others to experiment with and see what they sound like. Let's try the clarinet next. My sister played the clarinet when we were growing up. It was not quite as bad as when she was learning violin, I have to admit. When people are learning violin, it takes a little while to get them to a position where they're quite good at playing. And it takes a bit of getting used to that sound. So we're going to try out this one. It's just going to create a sound. It should sound a little bit like a clarinet. So it's a reed instrument. That means that the vibration on a clarinet is being caused by you blowing and the sound of the air being forced over a reed that's in the mouthpiece of the instrument. So it's a little bit different to other instruments. So as I said, it's all to do with vibration. This is the vibration of that reed in the instrument. And then what we're doing here is just recreating the sound wave that vibration would be creating by using the measurements. Again, would be in binary, actually on the device itself, because everything on a computer has to be measured in binary. So let's cut this one out and then we'll have a listen to what this clarinet sounds like. Okay, so let's pop the clarinet in and see what we hear. So I'm going to take out the celesta and pop in the clarinet, and hopefully we should get something that sounds a little bit like a clarinet. There we go, and I'm going to scan it again, and let's have a listen. There we go, so we can see the waveform that's been produced. So let's see if it sounds like a clarinet. Now we can change the pitch that we're playing at by using this little lever on the side. Let's go up. Let's try changing to a different... Let's try one of the other... So we can use these different numbers now to change different parts of the sound. So we can change the reverb, and then reverb is how like drawn out the note is. You hear there's like a little bit of a delay on it, and we can turn that down, up and down as well. Okay, so that is the sound that should sound a little bit like, it does actually sound quite a lot like a clarinet. So we've got one more to try, which is this one over here. So let's try our last one. We've got the last one to try, which is the organ sound. So if we're thinking about how the sounds are produced on the different instruments we've tried so far, I need to look up this celesta because I can't remember how that sound's produced. But the organ sound is produced by forcing the air through pipes in a traditional organ. Obviously, there's new type organs, which you could talk about like electric organs, but in a traditional organ, like a big church organ, the sound is produced by forcing air through pipes. And we talked about the clarinet, that uses reeds. So what other instruments could we talk about? We could talk about some of the stringed instruments like cello, violin, viola, and they all produce sound by the actual vibration of the string in the same way that a guitar works. And the actual body is hollow. And that helps to make the sound amplify more because it helps to build up the vibration inside the body of the instrument. So there you go. So that's how some other things work. So I'm just cutting out the organ waveform card now, and then we can have a listen to what that sounds like on the Labo. So the idea of this is, once you've had an experiment with the different sounds that are produced from either the waveforms that come with the Labo itself, and the ones that are provided in the worksheets, you could then use the blank ones to cut out some of your own experiments and see what different sounds you can produce from those. So again, you understand a little bit about how waveforms work and that it's actually a measurement of a sound wave. And you could even have a little look on the internet and see if you can find some example sound waves of different instruments that you like the sound of, and see if you can recreate some of those sounds on the Labo piano yourself. So I'm just finishing cutting these out. So each time there's two full waveforms. You can see it's repeated twice. Okay, and then as I said earlier, to make a lower sound, these would be drawn out. So you'd end up with one of these might fill the whole of this space, and you might find that you, for a higher sound, will end up with more of the sound waves packed into the same amount of area. So that makes a higher sound, and that's frequency, remember. So just finishing off my cutting out, and then hopefully we can have a little listen to what this organ sounds like. Just finishing cutting out the last little bit. Okay, so I'm just finishing cutting out the organ sound, and then we'll have a little listen to what that sounds like. Okay, so let's swap this one over and have a listen to what the organ sound sounds like. So swap that over, pop that one in, and then we should be able to listen to the organ sound. Oops. So we'll just scan it and have a little listen. Okay, and let's have a listen to what that one sounds like. Oops. Definitely sounds like an organ. So let's make it a lower pitch and see what that sounds like. Let's take it up one. Excellent. So there you go. So we've looked at some different waveforms and we've thought about how we can control the actual sound that's been created by changing the waveform. And we talked a little bit about how the different waveform and the shape of those waveforms will be created by taking samples, which are just measurements of the sound wave at regular intervals. And we talked about that in more detail in part 1 when we talked about how those samples will be recorded using binary. Okay, so let's have a look at what we're going to have a look at for our next section. Okay, so the very last bit that we're going to just finish off with is thinking about creating our own sounds. So we've gone into quite a lot of detail with the different waveform cards. So what I'd like you to do, if you do have the Nintendo Labo piano, and just to challenge yourself and finish off the session, is to take the blank sheets, which are, let's jump over and show you the blank sheets and remind you what they look like, these blank ones, and just experiment with creating your own waveform sounds. Maybe even go on the internet and actually do a bit of research and find out what different waveforms look like for some of your most favourite sounds. And that would be the last thing that I would get you to try. So we've really then just recapped everything that we've looked at in part 1. And we've looked at some of that in a little bit more detail, and we've actually experimented with some of that to find out a little bit more about how that actually works, especially when we've thought about how the vibration is what actually creates different sounds. So we're pretty much at the end of today's workshop. So what I'm going to just finishing off by doing is just talk you through some of the different objectives that we covered in today's session, and then as usual I'll give you a sneaky peek of what we're going to be looking at next time as well. So let me hop on to the PowerPoint and show you what we've covered in today's session. Okay, so in this workshop you've learnt about binary representation of denary, and we've looked at that in more detail in part 1, but then we connected that by looking at the punch cards at the beginning. We've talked a lot about how sound can be sampled and stored in digital form by using waveforms and the samples that are used to measure the different sound waves and create the different sound waves. We've looked at sampling intervals and how other factors affect the size of a sound file, and again we looked at some of that in more detail in part 1. We didn't actually look at compression in this section, but we did look at it in part 1 originally. So those are some of the bits that we've looked at over today's workshop. So that is pretty much the end of this workshop. I'm going to do a sneaky peek of the next part, which is going to be the shape calculator. So I'm just going to jump over and pull up the information that we need for that, and then I'll talk you through that, and then if there's any questions you can pop them into the chat while I'm going through that. Okay, so let's hop over to the website, which we're going to need. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to pop them into the chat for me. I always like getting some questions into our workshops, so please do feel free to pop some questions into the chat. While we're doing that, this is what we're going to be looking at next time. So we're going to be looking at shape calculators, and we're going to be creating them using Scratch. So you can see here I've been writing a procedure. I've written a procedure that is to create a square. So if I run the code, you'll see that Scratch draws a square. So this is just a very simple bit of programming that we'll do to start with, and then we'll be building on that as we go through the workshop, learning how to create different shapes and then how to build those shapes together in order to create a little bit of art, basically. So that's what we're going to be doing next time. So do join me for that if you enjoy using Scratch, or if you've not used Scratch before and you want to learn a little bit more about it, that's also perfect, and do come and join me for that. So I'm just going to have a little look and see if there's any questions in the chat today, and then we'll go through and then I'll just sign off for today's workshop. So any questions from today's workshop? While I'm just waiting to see if there's any questions coming through, don't forget our Eco Gamer workshop is coming up not next week, the week after, and we've got a special guest for that, so you might want to have a look at signing up for that. That's with Elle Ostley-Wood, and we're going to be looking at eco-friendly packaging and how that can be used to help people think about how you can make things more environmentally friendly, and we're going to be looking at Football Manager as an example of the of eco-friendly packaging, and we'll look in more detail about what changes they made in order to make the packaging more eco-friendly. So it doesn't look like we've got any questions coming through from today's workshop. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that you have had fun and learned something new. If you've enjoyed this workshop, please do check out our YouTube channel for more follow-along activities. If you've got any questions or feedback for me, please email dsh@ukie.org.uk. Now, we'd love to see you learning computing at home with Digital Schoolhouse. Parents and guardians, please feel free to share any images or videos using the hashtag computing at home on Twitter or on Facebook. Also, for those of you who love writing, Digital Schoolhouse have launched a creative writing competition, which you can find out more information about on our website. If you're the parent of a primary age pupil and are interested in finding out about how Digital Schoolhouse can work with your child's school, you can find out more information about our programme on our website digitalschoolhouse.org.uk. You can find out our contact information in the section below or at the end of this video. Lastly, I wanted to say a huge well done for taking part today. I'm Estelle and I look forward to seeing you next time.